your vote is the starting line of your citizenship, not the concluding finish line of your citizenship.
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley inContext, and it's my delight to have Dr. Jeff Myers on the program today. Jeff is the president of Summit Ministries, and I'm going to let him give a little bit of shameless self-promotion about Summit, because Cindy and I have been big fans of what Summit is trying to do over the years, and this is my first time to talk to Jeff, so I'm eager to hear about how that ministry continues to grow. He is an educator and entrepreneur. He's become one of America's most respected authorities on youth leadership development, and we certainly need that today. Dobson has referred to him as a very gifted and inspirational leader. Josh McDowell has called him a man who is 100% sold out, preparing the next generation to reflect the character of Christ. And I won't read too many of his wonderful endorsements, but he's authored 19 books and counting, including Understanding the Faith, Understanding Times, Understanding the Culture, which are used as textbooks around the country. He's got a brand new book out we'll talk about in a few minutes on Israel. But his passion obviously is for younger students, for college minds. And as we've read too many of the results of Barna's studies and otherwise, we're losing our young people when they go off to said universities or other influences. So we want to hear from a person that has a heart and engagement with this culture. So Jeff, thanks for coming on the program.
Michael, it's great to be with you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I've admired your work for a very long time, and I'm excited.
Well, thanks. Well, let's go ahead and talk about Summit, because Summit's been around a long time, and when I was pastoring, I would often we didn't talk about gap years, but we would often say, look, send them out to Summit, or there were some other ones as well, and give your college-bound kid a semester, a few weeks, even a year off before he or she goes into the throes of the university.
Well, that's exactly what our heart is. We equip and we support this rising generation to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. So we want them to not just view their faith as a personal spiritual engagement that maybe makes them feel better or get along better with other people, but to see it as the basis of a worldview that takes into account everything that's going on. You can be fully Christian when you're in your psychology class or your economics class, or when you're in your residence hall, or whether you're moving into leadership in a business or in the military, science, and all these different areas. And when young adults get that vision, then all of a sudden it moves them away from this fear-based, I have more to lose than I have to gain kind of mindset that typifies so many young adults today, moves them away from anxiety, moves them toward a sense of purpose and meaning. And we do this in a couple different ways. One is through curriculum courses that are taught in Christian schools, home schools, and even public school release time programs, 300 different schools doing that. So this is 70,000 young people a year who are getting biblical worldview training every single day. And then we have our programs as well, 11-day conferences. I've got one running next door right now with 185 young adults, 16 to 22 years of age, who are here to hear from amazing top Christian thought leaders who love Jesus, but who are at the top of their field, and everything from philosophy to economics. And the impact on their lives is absolutely enormous. And it's very satisfying to do this job.
Well, I'm glad to hear the good reports. My wife and I have talked a lot in the last few years about, it seemed like the younger Christian, maybe they're not thousands of them, but there's some pretty courageous young men and women who are standing up on campuses, they're standing up on policy, and you hope they have the tenacity and the support to keep that going long term, because you and I both know it's just about 1 decade away from being a complete disaster.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, there could not be a more urgent cause, but there couldn't be a cause that's more satisfying. When you watch young adults, they come into our program, 1% of Gen Z has a biblical worldview, 1%. And by the time they leave Summit, 95% say they embrace a biblical worldview. So we keep tracking them because you always think, oh, it's a camp. Everybody's excited when they leave.
Yeah, conference high, yeah.
Exactly, but when we keep studying them 1 year, 5 years, 10 years out. We've done this for a number of years in a row. So we have long-term trajectories. 85% stay strong in a biblical worldview.
Wow.
I mean, if you knew of an 11-day program that could have that kind of impact on a young adult, would you not move heaven and earth to make that possible for every person every young person you know?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. One of the reasons we're doing this series of interviews, Jeff, is because we're coming up to an election. This will air, somewhere right before the election, obviously. We've had a tumultuous few weeks at the time of our recording now. We've had a attempted assassination. We've had President Biden step aside. We're not sure what that's going to look like upcoming Democratic convention. But we want to engage our audience to think about this thing called politics and this thing called voting and why it's important. And you know the data far better than I do, but I keep up with it to know people aren't voting, Christians aren't voting. We have record numbers of Christians who don't vote. And it comes down to a lot of different things, but with that kind of opening salvo, your thoughts on that in a more of a broad stroke way.
Well, people are a little bit fascinated by what's happening in the political world, but mostly they're discouraged. The Pew Research Foundation said that 65% of people, when they thought of politics, said it made them feel exhausted. 55% said it made them feel angry. How about this? Only 4% said it made them feel excited. And it was... And then they were asked what word comes to mind when you think of politics, and divisive, corrupt, and it went downhill from there, including a lot of words I can't say on a family-oriented program. But people they're just sick of it. They're just fed up. They just don't like the angry old man rhetoric. They don't like they don't like the divisiveness. People want to make a living. They want to be free to live their lives. And so when you look at the kinds of issues that people really care about, it does come down to listen, guys, why don't you just shape up, get it together there in Washington, D.C., be mature, quit fighting, and do something that's good for the American people. But because we can't find that, most people are very suspicious of the process. And I think, unfortunately, Christians have disengaged. Unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people in the Christian world who are encouraging that disengagement. Yeah, I think that's a very tragic, short-sighted approach, and I'm happy to talk more about it in detail, though I won't name names.
Well, it's a challenging time because, again, I'm older, and when we grew up, and I've mentioned this on each of our guests, with each of our guests, the 80s was very critical and very clear what the issues were, and when we saw this Reaganomics and this Reagan sweep and this kind of rise for what we would call conservative, but as I've asked each of our guests, even I, as a conservative, pro-life, pro-marriage person, have unapologetically talked about the party has always disappointed me. You feel used. You feel like you're just a voting bloc, and then once they get into power, forget you. And that's more true than not. Now, yes, we've had some good policy enacted. We've had some justices that would not have been put in both federal and the Supreme Court levels. There's been good policy out of it, but the consumer who we're trying to get to vote, beyond the 4 or 5% I just talked about, they don't understand this or care about this.
Right. I'm encouraging people to not expect more out of a political party than what they can give. They exist for the purpose of getting people into office. They do have a platform. I bet you if we interviewed 99 people on the street, 99 of them didn't even know that either political party has a platform of things they stand for. So they're voting based on the personalities of the people that they see in there. But a political party is just trying to get out the vote at this time of the year. That's what they do. I think we have to keep in mind a couple things. First of all, your vote is the starting line of your citizenship, not the concluding finish line of your citizenship. So when people say, "Oh, I don't think these candidates who get in there represent me," well, what have you done besides vote? Have you ever called them? Have you ever written a letter? Have you ever gone to testify? When they come to town and do town halls, do you go? Do you express your concerns? And most people say, no, I've never done anything like that. I just sit back here and just sort of expect everybody to do my work for me. That's just not good citizenship. I think the second thing we have to keep in mind is we're not really voting for the lesser of two evils when we vote. Christians ought to know this better than anybody else, that there's a sin nature inside every person. So is the person running for office evil? Yeah. City council that person's evil. And so is the mayor. And so is the person running for president. We all have a sin nature. Well, I think a better way to think of it is, how do I use my vote to lessen evil? For me, that's been very clarifying, and I'm happy to expand on either one of those ideas, but those help me a lot to keep my expectations in line.
Well, go ahead. I mean, open that up a little more then.
Well, voting for the lesser of two evils means that you feel that you're always making a compromise when you're voting. But you've got to keep in mind what kind of a country we have. I'm speaking now to Americans. I know your show goes all over the world, but I'm speaking specifically to Americans at this point. Abraham Lincoln said, we have government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So you don't work for the president of the United States. The president of the United States works for you. You don't work for your mayor. Your mayor works for you. We sometimes forget that. Christian pastors sometimes forget it. They preach Romans 13 and say, you must submit to the governing authorities, as if you're somehow obligated as a Christian to do whatever the person in charge says. But that's not the kind of government we have. In a constitutional republic, the people are the rulers. I would take Romans 13 and turn it back on the pastor who's preaching, that you shouldn't be involved, and just say, listen, you cannot obey God if you are not involved, because we are the rulers in this country. And to obey the governing authorities, you must be a good citizen.
When you think about the flyover states and the kitchen table, issues of, I'm concerned about $100 gas in my car. I'm concerned about my groceries being 35 to 40% higher. Even Cindy and I, who in God's kindness we're blessed. We don't buy a lot of things that we used to buy indiscriminately. It was like, well, I'm not going to pay that. It's not worth that amount of money to me. I'll go without. I'll do something else. And these kitchen table economies and kitchen table topics, I mean, we all vote for our constituencies. A question I've asked all our guests, if I live in the auto industry areas of Detroit, or the manufacturing, labor, if I live in a farming area, if I live in a technology area, I'm pretty much going to be voting with that constituency, even as a believer.
I think that's true. There is some sense in which we vote our interests. But part of being a believer and thinking this through is recognizing that the virtues we hold to scripturally aren't the ordinary ones. G.K. Chesterton called faith, hope, and love the unreasonable virtues, because they don't arise from any evolutionary process. You can't say that you'll be a better person at surviving or reproducing if you hold to faith, hope, and love.
I thought it was money, sex, and power, right?
Right. Going back even further, Augustine of Hippo, when he wrote his book, City of God Against the Pagans, it was basically what was happening in Rome at that time. It's kind of interesting, the parallels. But he found that in Rome at that time, Rome was collapsing and looking for scapegoats and blaming Christians.
Yep.
So he wrote and said, listen, the citizen of the kingdom of God will always be the best citizen in the kingdom of man, precisely because he has an allegiance to something that is higher than the state. Instead of just asking what's the short-term policy that we want the federal government to impose that will help us, even if it hurts other people, we should be asking what kind of government is necessary to permit the sorts of freedom that enable people to thrive and to flourish and to start businesses and to grow. Especially with minority issues. I was speaking with our students the other day about this. So I've got a lot of students who come from different minority groups, and they realized as we were going through this, the best thing you can do to help somebody who's part of a minority group is to give them a free market where they can start a business without a lot of red tape. Half of new business starts, Michael, in the United States of America in the last 5 years have been started by minority groups where they have businesses. They have 12 times the wealth of other people in that group. So I'm looking for that kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
How do we promote freedom so that it isn't just these big corporations that can succeed, but it's the everyday businesses of everyday people?
Well, that is the structure of a free market economy, right? I mean, you can go play with a tennis shoe and a waffle iron in your garage and come up with a new tread and become Nike, or you can be one of 55% of the American economy is small business, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Well, you
and
think
that wouldn't
about,
happen anywhere else in the world except in America.
No, it's very, very rare. So let's say you're in Cuba, you want to start a family restaurant. You have to pay off the local officials to give you the only license to have a restaurant in your neighborhood. Then you can serve terrible food at the highest possible prices. It doesn't matter because there's no competition. The government interference makes it impossible for people to run successful businesses. But I'm a fan. I'm a fan of business. I really do believe that trying to be successful in business, you have to serve in order to succeed.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about money, this is always true. The only way you can keep it is to give it away. Right?
What Ron Blue says, there's 5 things you can do with money. You can spend it, you can pay down taxes, you can invest it, you can give it away, and I forget the 5th one.
Yeah, but you can't keep it.
You can't keep it.
You can't keep it.
Yeah, that's the point.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to what is a football. What are politics? What is politics?
So politics comes from a Greek word meaning the rule of a city. What does it take to defend the city, to provide the services inside of the city? Who counts as a citizen? What are the obligations of citizens, and so forth? That's really what politics is about. So people think about kissing babies and lots of balloons and streamers and television commercials and things like that. But at the root of it, it's the rule of a city. The everyday things that we take for granted. I turned on the water tap this morning and I expected water to come out. That is not a reasonable expectation. There were tens of thousands of people who laid miles of pipe and put together all kinds of reservoirs and cleaning systems and all those sorts of things so that when I turn on the tap, I can get a drink of water and not die. Those kinds of things have to happen in order for a society to develop well. And it's political people in a constitutional republic, representatives that we choose to send to those places to make those decisions for us, that constitute the basis of politics. Most of politics is super boring. Should the power lines go above ground or underground? All of those kinds of things. But you need godly people who are believers in there to make those wise decisions and to be present when controversial things come up where somebody's trying to impose a non-biblical worldview of some sort.
So if we go back to the polis, to the city, and to the people involved in the city and the leaders, how does a biblical theology, a biblical worldview impact our politics?
One of the best ways I've seen of articulating this was Abraham Kuyper. He's the guy who Chuck Colson always used to quote him, probably every single speech.
Dutch reformer.
Dutch reformer. Yeah, there's not one square inch of all of creation about which Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all, does not cry out, "This is mine. This belongs to me." So we do believe as Christians, John 8:32, Jesus said, if you follow my teachings, you'll be my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The word for truth there, I always hate to do this when I'm speaking to somebody who's a longtime pastor, but that word is aletheia. It means reality. Jesus is saying, you follow my teachings, reality itself will open up for you. So Kuyper looked back at this and said, what are the aspects or the spheres of a good society? And he realized there are 3 dominant spheres. These occur repeatedly in Scripture: the family, the church, and the state. And then when those spheres are balanced, you have the best possible society. Never perfect. We're in a fallen world. But the best possible society comes from the active process of balancing those spheres, where the family takes responsibility for education and for the economics. The church takes responsibility to be the conscience of society. And then the state takes the responsibility to punish evil and to protect its citizenry.
Yeah, I love that, and I often think of justice in the Old Testament, which was a 2-sided sword. In order to mete out mercy, you have to cut. It was never a one-sided story. And when the psalmist says, "I will sing of loving kindness and justice," I think it was Spurgeon called it the bitters and sweets of a government, because in order to administer, you are going to punish someone to quit another. And I think the hand of government, we're queasy because we feel infiltrated. We feel our thought life, our metadata, everything that we used to protect and call privacy is gone. And so we live with a very suspicious view of it. And I love your review of Augustine. So the basics then, the believer in Christ, and you know this better than me, we're disengaged because we're disenfranchised. We're discouraged by these people. My vote doesn't matter. Yeah, I know it's a stewardship and I probably should vote, but to me, it's still the lesser of two evils. And that guy's character is bad, and that guy's a, fill in the blank. What do you say to him?
Well, I'll tell you how I make the decision. It's very difficult for me to figure out how to make the decision for somebody else. People have a lot of factors they're taking into account. But I just I first of all want to look at a candidate for office and ask the question, does this person genuinely believe that it is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being? To me, that's a super basic question. And of course, I'm applying that to children who aren't yet born, as well as those who are born. But is there a respect for life? But when I look back and ask, where does that value come from? It comes from two things. First of all, that God cares about his glory. His glory emanates from his very character. He cannot not care about his glory, and his glory covers the whole earth, the psalmist says. And the second thing is that God cares about his image bearers, that he made us in his image and in his likeness. We were made to relate and to create. So I'm going to be always asking the question, look, politics is it's a zero-sum game in a way. There are only so many offices that can be held. There's only so much you can do. Scarcity is present in that situation. It's often win-lose. If one person wins, another is going to lose. Very few other things in society are genuinely like that. Economics is not like that. It is not win-lose. The total amount of wealth in a society can grow when we apply our minds creatively to coming up with new ideas and innovating. What we need is a government that stays out of the way so that it's more of a traffic cop than a criminal prosecutor model. And I think even if people were perfectly fair-minded, if everybody wanted to serve all of the time, if we didn't really have the effects of a sin nature, would we still need government? And I think the answer is yes. I don't agree with James Madison on this. He said if all men were angels, government would not be necessary. Well, we'd still have to have a traffic cop, right? You'd still have people trying to pull out on the highway. And what if they're all day long saying, oh, you first. Oh, no, you first. I could, nobody would ever get anything done. Yeah. So I think those two are huge values for me about what I think about when I go into the ballot box. Which one respects life? Which one understands that God is the one who is to be glorified, and that we can, through promoting a system that brings about accountability, allow for the freedom for people to live their lives. They might not make good decisions, but they might. What we're finding out from economists now, the more people on the planet, the better. Paul Romer won a Nobel Prize demonstrating this. It's not that more people are worse for the world. They're actually better because they're more minds to solve all of the problems. But you have to be free to be able to do it.
My friend Cal Beisner, we talk about CO2 in the same way. You can't have too much CO2 in the environment lest you think it's going to hurt the planet somehow. When Christians abandon, when they wheel back and they say, it doesn't really matter, it's the Electoral College anyway when it comes to a presidential election, my vote, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, what I say is, a couple things. First of all, just reverse your thinking. Start thinking about your school board first, and your city council first, and your mayor first, and then move on to your state representative, your state senator. This country is big, 350 million people, but you can get to know those people personally. You can go to those meetings. I go to breakfast with my city councilman, and he asks, what is a biblical worldview of whether power lines should go above the ground or below the ground? I mean, it's tough. We have all these kinds of tough conversations, but you can get to know these people. So don't let what's happening on television that keeps viewers attached stop you from thinking through what your responsibilities are as a citizen. Ultimately, we say politics, we think of, it's got to be the federal government. Well, the very idea of politics is the city, the polis, with the rule of a city. So let's start there first. And the second thing, Michael, I think is so important. I just make out a little pyramid for my students. I say at the bottom of the pyramid are the principles on which our society is based. Always start with those. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. No one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. On top of those principles are policies. The policies are things like, this is the way government needs to be constituted. These are the kinds of guidelines that we want our government officials to have so they can do their job and not keep us from doing ours. And then at the very pinnacle, personalities. So the founders of the United States went from principles to policies to personalities. Thomas Jefferson said, I sacrifice my desire to have my personality be the right one to what's most important, which are the principles on which everything is based. Today, Michael, people go exactly the opposite.
The opposite, yep.
They go the opposite. They start with the personalities. I don't like the way that man does his hair, so whatever he's for, I'm against. And there's no way you can arrive at rational policies. And there's no way those policies will ever be based on principles that are enduring if you go that way.
I agree 100%. My question is, we're the 1 or 2% of the population, not to sound arrogant, they're talking about what you just said. Because the average, man or woman that loves his family, they're believers, they have a local church, they have a job, they have a mortgage, they're putting food on the table. They could not have articulated what you just said, Jeff.
Oh, I think you're probably right. When I speak to our students about it, for them, it's really a revelation, because we have such a materialist, naturalist, secular viewpoint of the world that it comes out in the fact that we think the personalities are the most important thing. Now, personalities matter.
Excuse me for interruption. Excuse me for interrupting, but I think my daughter told me the other day, she goes, these young people their goal is to be a social influencer. What do you want to be when you grow up? A social influencer. It's like, back to personality. It's all about how I dress, what I buy, my palette on my Instagram, TikTok account. I mean, how do we get here? It's just, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah,
I had to get that out.
It's pretty surfacey. But there are a lot of students who've thought, oh man, life is actually pretty simple. If I can just get a lot of followers on social media, then I can get sponsors and so forth, and I can turn that into a living. It's not that many people, but they do have a huge influence. I mean, I did a show the other day with a young guy. He's probably 23. He has 400,000 followers. And the whole time I'm doing the show, I'm thinking,
why?
I am talking to more people right now than I would if I did a hit on Fox News or on CNN.
Yeah.
And he's just 23. Now, in that case, he's using his platform in a very wise way, incredibly wise. He's an old soul. But there are a lot of people who they kind of dumb down life. The more we pay attention to them, the less we care about the things that are really important. The more self-centered we become rather than focused on bringing flourishing to other people.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Help me understand. We have, we talked about Augustine, and most of our guests have brought this up, City of God. How do I keep my allegiance focused on the kingdom of God when I'm horizontally in a corrupt kingdom of man?
I think the way to do it is by asking what implications flow from the fact that God is real and that he cares about what's going on in the world, that he cares about his glory. How do I glorify God? How do I care for his image bearers? That you stay focused on those principles. I think if people were to look back, maybe those who were involved in the church during the Nazi Germany years, if they were to look back, what would they conclude? Would they conclude that they were, in fact, vertically oriented, that they were thinking about what God wants in this situation, or are they only thinking about how to stay out of trouble? When we decide that we'd rather live a life that avoids risk than one that obeys God, then we're always going to be in trouble, and we'll never be the conscience of our society.
It's frightening in so many ways. I want to talk about your book, your new book on Israel. But before we transition over there, what gives you hope in this whole structure in which we're locked into? Because I'm 67, and the older I've gotten, I joked before we started recording, I want to get a "Get Off My Lawn" T-shirt, because it's almost, it's ostensibly, are you kidding me? How did we get here? And so I can become not pessimistic, but almost, well, I guess it is a resignation. It's like, are you kidding me? This is where we're at. And I think a lot of my peers feel the same way.
I think so. You could break it down by generation, from the baby boom generation to Gen X to millennial generation to Gen Z. You see a lot of big differences. I really I love the time that I get with these Gen Z young adults. I've had hundreds of hours just this summer in with them in lectures and over dinner and Q&A sessions. And they have so much potential. They want answers. They want to live with purpose. They want to have meaning in their lives. When they feel safe to ask tough questions, oh my word, they throw some zingers your way. It's hysterical. I did a media interview on the Israel book, and somebody said, okay, well, I hope it's okay, but our host is going to be asking really tough questions. I said, I guarantee you, your host cannot ask any tougher questions than I have faced in 7 different Q&A sessions on Israel this summer with these 16 to 22-year-olds. And I was right, because they love to engage once they realize somebody will take them seriously, somebody's giving them a sense of responsibility. And sometimes they end up focusing on a biblical worldview. Sometimes they go off in different directions, but that's going to be life anyway. Why not invest in them? Why not have the time with them? I get a huge kick out of it. It gives more meaning to my life than anything else I can think of doing right now. And it's true. We have our own kids, our grandkids. There are times right now where we could make such a difference. I tell the students at Summit Ministries, learn these 4 words. I need old people. And they all start laughing, and then they repeat after me, and they say, yeah, that's true. I do. I don't need old people because they know how to put an app on their phone. I need old people because they have the kind of wisdom that years of experience entitle you to possess. So bringing the generations together gives me hope. Seeing the hopefulness in young adults and helping them be set free from their culture so they can live lives that are fully committed to Jesus. I can't think of anything better to do.
Well, it sounds like you got a hand in glove ministry there, brother. Let's talk about your new book. Let's talk about what provoked you to write a book on Israel.
Well, it was my concern for Gen Z. So after the October 7th terrorist attacks, I saw a Harvard University poll done by Mark Penn, who's a fantastic pollster, very reliable guy. He said 51% of young adults said that they believe that Hamas's actions against Israel were justified because of Palestinian grievances. I kept tracking that number. In December, Mark does this poll every month. By December, the number had gone up to 60%. So I wrote an op-ed for Daily Wire, and it was called, Congratulations, America, You've Raised a Generation of Terrorist Sympathizers, which got a little bit of attention. It led to an opportunity to go to the land to interview people from the left and from the right, religious, secular, Arab, Jew, Palestinian, settler, all the different people, IDF, intelligence officers, journalists, to try to find out what's going on so that I could come home and communicate about this critical issue in a way that helps the rising generation not be indoctrinated by the propaganda that they are receiving. And I hope it's going to work. The book has been widely distributed so far, the best distributed book we've ever had at Summit Ministries, at least in the last 30 years. Just within the last month, because people know this isn't just about a strip of land in the Middle East. It's about everything everywhere. That in many ways, the very people who are attacking Israel in the Middle East, they're ideologically aligned in their hatred of Judeo-Christian civilization with what we call here, all different kinds of terms, but the progressive left. You know, people who are here, but they believe that America is a force for evil rather than a force for good in the world. And that their mindset has completely indoctrinated this rising generation. Michael, 16% of young adults today say they're proud to be Americans. 16%. So, I mean, what does that mean? That means 8 out of every 10 or more than, you're going to find when you talk to them that they listen to our rhetoric on the right and on the left. They say, well, all you guys seem to hate government. I mean, you hate everything America stands for. You're just talking critically all the time. But what we hear is, we want to make America better. What they hear is, it's pointless. It's pointless. So let's just give up. So I think it's really significant that we always communicate. I am concerned about the future of our nation, but I do not believe we are helpless. So let's talk about it from that perspective.
And yet there's also the tension that, we have a sovereign who, back to just lost the name. Every Kuiper, every
Kuiper.
inch is God's. We've got a structure that, from a theological framework, forget the worldview for a minute. He's sovereign. He's eternal. He's the King of Kings, and no one, he bows to no one. And so, for the theologian in me, I'm like, yeah, this is a chess game, and I appreciate your emphasis on lessening evil, but I also know who wins, and I also know who loses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that keeps us humble in a constitutional republic is that we don't always get what we want, but we can still always fight for what we need. There's a little bit of channeling.
Mick Jagger said that. I think Mick Jagger said that.
Little bit of channeling of the Rolling Stones there. Yeah.
So what were some of the ahas for you when you were on Israel talking to the different interests?
Oh, man, a couple things just popped out at me right away. First of all, Israel is a very diverse society, as you well know. You've had many trips there.
Yes, it is.
103 different nationalities speaking 85 different languages. It's very diverse. It does not meet the white colonialist settler thing that's the mentality that's often put on top of them. But it's also very politically diverse. We think, oh, this is really bad in America because we got these two political parties fighting. They have 55 political parties in Israel for 9 million people. 15 of them have seats in the Knesset. Their majority
trying to get a government over there, goodness.
Oh, it's crazy. Their majority party only has 32 of the 120 seats. They are fighting all of the time. But when they are attacked, they come together with, as a friend of mine, a we-ness that we don't have here. And the other thing is just their faithful presence. They're just very determined to continually be faithful to what they believe is true. One of the guys I met over there is a far left journalist, works for a newspaper there that makes the New York Times look conservative. And he said to me, I go back to my kibbutz. I'm moving back, even though it was attacked. His home was grenaded and shot, and his family survived. I'm going back because it's a mission. I said, really? I mean, you're about the most secular person I can imagine. Why would you say a mission? Do you go back with weapons? He said, no, we fight through our presence, that we're going to show the terrorists that they cannot win. That mentality, that we will not let evil win, is so fundamental to Scripture, but many Christians have forgotten it. We just kind of give up. We say the evil is so bad, there's nothing I can possibly do about it. You really need to go to Israel and talk to everyday people who disagree on 9 out of every 10 things, but they do believe that evil can be pushed back and that it's their personal responsibility to do it.
Well, and they've endured so much that, that's the only option they have other than obsolescence. And, when you have enemies arguably on 3 sides, certainly extended that parameter. I often tell friends that have never been there, I say, when you look at the landmass of the Middle East, Israel's about 3, maybe 4% of the landmass. But because of its location, the so-called King's Highway or the Via Maris, whatever you want to call it, it's a rich, fertile area of transport, of, ocean access, all these things. And it's like, this has got to be it's got to be evil, because all this land in the Middle East that could be habitable is a wasteland. Israel's turned theirs into a very habitable country, and these other cultures around them would, ostensibly the Muslims, would wipe them off the map.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
so you have to fight.
Yeah, you got to fight. I remember Jerome Perez is from the Mizrahi Foundation there. It's a group of religious Zionists, and he met with our group, and his son was missing from the October 7th attack. We later found out the boy had been killed. But at the time, Jerome Perez said something to me that I really took home. He said, you think you can, he said, in Israel, we can't really run. We have no place to run to. But he said, even in America, he said, the problem is trying to run away is that you're always taking yourself with you. You can't run away. You have to engage. You have to engage, not escape. That's at the heart of what really makes the good life. I'll tell you, it's so weird to think. Israelis, on a list of the happiest nations in the world, rank 4th out of all the nations of the world in the middle of all of these attacks. America's 15th. We have comparatively, our lives are so easy, and yet we are not as happy. Why are they happy? Because they just have decided the life of standing against evil and coming together around what's really important, and then vigorously debating everything else is a good life.
Remind me sometime to tell you about some of the IDF talking to the West after 9/11 and what they told me. But yeah, it's a different mindset, and you have to love not only their courage and bravado, but you're right. When they're attacked, they're one people, and they don't have an option. It's like we're together on this. I mean, you do have some uber fringe elements that don't play well together, but even that seems to be being examined right now as we speak. But anything else?
I'll tell you what, one thing I thought was so weird is I saw these two protests. They're against each other. They're yelling. Comes to 9 o'clock, the protest is over.
Coffee.
And they shake hands and they all leave. It's
coffee.
It's hysterical.
Yeah.
I sometimes wish that our fights could be like that. We need to be more engaged. But anyway, that's why I wrote the book. Should Christians Support Israel? And I want to, if it's okay, I want to give that book to everybody who's watching or listening right now.
That'd be wonderful. We'll put it in the show notes, and they can follow your link, whatever you want to provide us. We'd be happy to do that. Final thoughts on whatever is on your heart, Jeff. The upcoming election, your concern for a younger generation, the church. Any final thoughts?
Well, we live in unprecedented times, but we have been given the gift of focus. We can focus in on Scripture. And because we have that as our true north, then we can make sense of where we need to go. For most of my life, people have told me, a good society is one where nothing ever happens, right? It's boring. We do not live in boring times. We live in incredibly exciting times. This is not a time for us to back away, but to press in. So that's why I continually emphasize with my students, engage, not escape. Engage, not escape.
Dr. Jeff Meyer, president of Summit Ministries. As always, our show notes have information about our guests. And if you've got a young person in your household or in your area of influence, you ought to let him or her know about Summit. It'd be a great 11-day program or an online program. Look into their curriculum. They've been doing extraordinary work for decades, and we so appreciate, Jeff, your leadership, and we look forward to how God's going to use you and Summit Ministries in the days, months, and years to come.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be partnered with you.